Good evening, and Happy New Year. Rosh Hashanah. What Rosh Hashanah? I will explain. But yes, we do celebrate a Rosh Hashanah during the month of Kislev, or as it is this year, November. I think, in fact, it would always be in November, maybe some years in December, the 19th and 20th of Kislev. The 19th and 20th of Kislev celebrate the great festival of the liberation of the author of the Tanya, Rosh Zalman of Liadi, founder of Chabad Hasidut, when he was freed from his imprisonment. And how can you have 2 days celebrating one event? Well, as I will explain, it actually took place over 2 dates, and we'll get to the story in a moment. But being Rosh Hashanah, well, Rosh Hashanah is 2 days all over the world, even in Israel, where all festivals are normally just 1 day. Rosh Hashanah is 2 days. This being the Rosh Hashanah for Chassidut, appropriately, it is celebrated over a 2-day period. So we tell the story. We tell the story of the arrest and the liberation and the events that led up to it, just like we tell the story of Hanukkah on Hanukkah. We tell the story of Purim on Purim. We tell the story, and I want to share the story with you. I want to share it at 3 levels. I want to share it at the simple level, maybe the backstory, and then what's going on a bit, a deeper realm. And it's all happening all at the same time. But of course, depends how you look at events. So the simple story, as we have it, is that on the day after Simchat Torah, the Russian authorities arrive to arrest the Alter Rebbe, as he is known. He is the author of the book of Tanya. He is the known as Rosh Zalman of Liadi, and they come to arrest him. He is being accused of supporting the enemy. Why is that? Well, one of the big endeavors of the Rebbe was to collect funds for the poor of the Holy Land. He founded a charity called Kolel Chabad, and collected money among the Russian Jews, who themselves were not exactly flush, but poverty in Israel was terrible, was very, very, very deep. And so they collected money and they sent it. Problem was that Palestine at the time was part of the Turkish Empire, which was the enemy of the Russian Empire. So that didn't kind of work out very well. So he was accused of helping the enemy. He was arrested. He was kept in jail for 53 days, and then charges were dismissed, were found to be without any foundation, and he was sent home. And great celebration, of course, because the followers, the Hasidim, were very concerned about these charges and this arrest, and the fact that he was freed was, of course, a cause for big celebration. And here is, in fact, the Alter Rebbe. It's, of course, not a photograph. It's a drawing, but all the drawings kind of seem to be the same, so it's a pretty good likeness. And there is a representation, a drawing of the arrest, famous black wagon in which he was loaded, which was reserved, in fact, for criminals of a very dangerous nature. He's taken and travels a great distance, and he's incarcerated in this fortress, which is on the Never River in what is now, slowly. I think it's now called St. Petersburg again. It was Leningrad, but they reverted to the previous name, but this was, of course, pre-revolution. He was, it was known by that name. Excuse me, if I leave the screen for a second, I'm just plugging in the internet cable rather than the Wi-Fi, because it seems to work much better for Zoom. An absolute data guzzler, so that worked. Here's a power cable for a laptop, because the last thing we would want is to lose power in the middle. So, having taken care of this housekeeping, well, that's the story, and the is freed, cause for celebration. All right, so that's the story at the kind of superficial level. That's probably how the story would have been printed in don't think they had Pravda back then, but that was a communist newspaper, but whatever was the Russian paper of the time, would say, rabbi arrested, kept in jail for 53 days, charges dismissed, he's gone home, and his followers celebrate greatly. Does that give cause for a yontif that's going to be celebrated as Rosh Hashanah generations later? Well, it's significant, but let's maybe take it at the next level. Understand, what led to this arrest, and we find out that in fact the Alter Rebbe was framed on these charges of helping the enemy nation. By whom, you may ask? Well, he had started a new movement, one that was not popular and immediately accepted among the entire Jewish spectrum. And the Hasidim were viewed with suspicion by many. If you look at the background, this is not long after false messiahs, the most famous, of course, infamous being Shabtai Tzvi. People are very wary of anybody who comes and announces himself to introduce novelty into Judaism. It's frightening, and people are very wary and suspicious. And there was a huge opposition to the movement going back at its inception with the Alter Rebbe. That's when a movement called the Mitnagdim, or the opponents. Nowadays, some people will call themselves the Mitnaged or Misnagid, whichever one pronunciation you want to use, but that's kind of just, of historical significance. There isn't that kind of position to the movement, which over the generations has met with understanding and acceptance. But people were extremely worried. And of course, the Gaon of Vilna was very opposed to the movement. Pshnei Zalman tried to meet with him. That kind of never materialized. So we understand where it's coming from, why suddenly Russian government would arrest a person, a rabbi of all people, and accuse him of supporting the enemy. It was actually, he was being framed, it was a setup, and it was all for the purpose of trying to, get rid of a person of that caliber, and with that maybe put pay to the Hasidic movement once and for all, if his leader was in that way incapacitated. So that gives you a bit of the background, understanding as to why there was an arrest, and thank God, well, it failed, and the Alter Rebbe came back home to his Hasidim, and there was great rejoicing. But I want to take it at an even deeper level. So we looked at what would have been printed in the paper, and then we look at what would have happened if somebody, really did a very deep investigative story on this and found out, where the accusations had come from and why there was so much opposition and hatred. Incidentally, when the Alter Rebbe was freed on the 19th of Kislev, he was taken to the address of a Hasid who lived in the town of St. Petersburg, as they called it, and but somehow the address got mixed up, and he ended up in the home of one of the detractors, one of the mitnagdim, so to speak, who didn't let him leave. So his incarceration continued for several hours, and of course, eventually, the rest of the Hasidim found out that news was out that he had been freed and but they couldn't find him. And they finally located him and managed to achieve his freedom. So that happened after nightfall, and hence the 2 days, the 19th when the authorities released him, and the 20th when the opponents released him, and he was able to actually regain his freedom in the full sense of the word. So that's why today, 20 Kislev is still a continuation of the celebrations, and hence appropriate that we discuss this. But that was. Now we know the backstory, we know the machinations, we know the conspiracy. But nothing happens here where there isn't kind of, something going on up there that's making it happen. And let me, by way of 3 anecdotes that are often told about this arrest, share with you how it's clear that this is no simple, straightforward stuff. So initially, The authorities came to arrest the Alter Rebbe during Sukkot, during Chol HaMoed Sukkot. And the Alter Rebbe ran out the back door and managed to escape them. Of course, it was obvious they were going to come in again. But in the meantime, he was on the run. And he went to discuss the matter with a confidant, a famous Chassid, who was known as Reb Shmuel Munkes. He said to him, what do I do? Do I give myself over to the authorities, or do I continue to be on the run? And Reb Shmuel says to him, if you truly are Rebbe, you have nothing to fear. If you're not really Rebbe, if you're a charlatan, then, with your teachings of Chassidut, what you've taught people, about giving up on the pleasures of this world and elevating yourself spiritually, what right would you have had to deprive so many people of the joys of this world unless you're really a Rebbe? So you clearly are a Rebbe, and if you are a Rebbe, fear not, everything is going to be okay. Doesn't really make sense. Doesn't make sense. I mean, do you ask advice? Do you decide whether you're going to get arrested or not? If the authorities want you, they want you. A couple of days later, day after Simchas Torah, the authorities came back and he was taken away. It was a long journey to get from Wide Russia to the north of Russia to what is now Leningrad. It's a journey that took several days in the wagon. And Friday afternoon, the Alter Rebbe asked if they would please stop for Shabbos because they didn't want to travel on Shabbos. So they refused, obviously. You're a prisoner and you don't really have that privilege of stopping for Shabbos and really celebrate your religious day. Fair enough. The wagon stopped. You're not going to stop. The wagon stopped. It seemed to be stuck. Nobody could move it. Eventually, they realized that nothing was broken and that the wheels weren't stuck in any mud, and this was the Rebbe's work. So they asked if we'd release them. But at that point, the Rebbe said, no, we're going to spend Shabbos right here. But he allowed them to move the wagon to the side of the road, so they weren't stuck kind of in the middle of the pathway. Similarly, when the Alter Rebbe was being taken for interrogation, so you needed a little shuttle boat to get him out of the fortress and across the river. And at one point, he says to the warder who's taking him across, I can see there is a moon up there, beginning of the month. I'd like to make Kiddush Levana. I guess you're out of your mind, we don't stop for prayers in the middle of the river. The Alter Rebbe said, look, I want you to stop. And when the fellow refused, well, the boat stopped. From all three of these stories, it seems that though the Russian authorities feel that they're in charge, clearly the Alter Rebbe is in charge of his own destiny all along. So clearly this is not a normal arrest and liberation. There's kind of a spiritual backstory. What was this arrest all about? So let's backtrack. We have to go back in history, but before I take you on this journey in history, the Alter Rebbe relates that he had a visitor in jail. Several, but there were some interrogators, but then there were some very interesting visitors. The Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich. And the Baal Shem Tov kind of founded the Hasidic dynasty, not Chabad Chassidut, but Chassidut in general. His disciple, the Maggid of Mezrich, followed under the leadership of that movement. They were mystics, they were isolated from society. It wasn't widespread, but it was gaining momentum. And then the Alter Rebbe was a disciple of the Maggid of Mezrich. So it's kind of the first three rungs of first three chains of that chain of transmission. And the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich share with the Alter Rebbe the reason for his arrest. They say it's because he has been spreading hidden parts of the Torah, Chassidut, widely. And for that reason, this is going on. He asks them, well, then should I stop? And he says, no. Sorry, he says to them, should I stop? And they say, no. In fact, we should carry on even stronger at an even greater intensity, which is in fact what happened after, his release. Now let's now go back in history to what's been going on for a while. History has been spanning almost 6 millennia from the time the world was created, and until where we stand now. It's 5782. That's kind of close to the end of the 6th millennium. The millennia of history represent days of the week. And one can go, a bit deeper into the Kabbalah thereof, but there are 6 Sfirot. There's Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, and the 6 days of creation back in the Garden of Eden, at the beginning of Genesis. Each of these days represents, so is influenced by one of those Sfirot, and one can look at what was created in each of those days, and that would correlate very well. And history also, the 6th millennium of history we've been living through, each millennium fits with one of those Sfirot. And for example, the first millennium was God's pure loving kindness, that is Chesed. There was terrible things going on, like the Tower of Babel and the flood in the 2nd millennium, which would be Gevurah, or God's judgment, in the 3rd millennium, which is a Sephirah called Tiferet, which is a blending of kindness, giving, and holding back. That's the millennium in which the Torah was given, and so it goes. So one can do a very interesting study of the history of the world. And in fact, if the Ramban Nachmanides has a fascinating essay in Bereshit, where he correlates events in world history to the various Sfirot, and shows that each millennium corresponds to one of those dimensions. What happens when the 6th millennium is over? Well, what happens at the end of the 6th day? We all know. Friday night, 6th day, Shabbos. So we're now on the eve of Shabbos. And when Shabbos comes in, that's the era of Mashiach. In fact, in benching, when we thank Hashem for the meal, at the end of benching, we say on Shabbat, may God now give us a day which is entirely Shabbat, and that's a reference to that era of Mashiach, which is sabbatical in every respect. So we're moving into the sabbatical here. Mashiach is going to be a totally different world, nothing like we know it, mainly because new dimensions of Torah are going to be revealed by Mashiach. And that's going to change the way the world sees God. It's going to change the way the world relates to God. It's going to change the way the world relates to Torah. When it's out there and everything is absolutely patently clear. It's like switching on a light in a dark room. We've been walking around and bumping because you couldn't see where everything is, and suddenly somebody switches on the light. Nothing's changed. All the objects are in the same place. You won't knock into them anymore. So this world is kind of, nothing makes sense. And we get all these bumps and knocks, etc. And then somebody switches on the light in the room, and everything makes sense, and everything is clear. We can now see, what was this bump, and what was that bump, and why was this smooth, and so forth. But it's mainly because there'll be a new dimension of revelation of Torah when Mashiach comes. So that process actually began at the beginning of the 6th millennium, just like we prepare for Shabbos on Friday. So at the beginning of the 6th millennium, this process began. And particularly in the second half, because you don't really spend the night preparing for Shabbos. When you wake up in the morning, that's when you start cooking for Shabbos. So as we get closer and closer to the end of Friday, dimensions of Torah are getting more and more revealed. And parts of Torah which were always there, but they were called Pnimiyut, or the secrets of Torah, Kabbalah, or mystical Torah, whatever you want to call it, begins with the Ari, the holy Ari, who comes along and says it is a mitzvah and it is permitted, right? It's permitted and a mitzvah to reveal this inner chokhmah, as you call this, inner wisdom. But at that point, it's still reserved for the inner circles. And we have small groups of mystics, a big group centered in Tzfat in Israel, but it's not mainstream. It's isolated. The Baal Shem Tov comes along and he reveals something that we refer to as Torah HaChassidut, which is a new dimension, still reserved. It's still a small circle of disciples, but it's revealing at a wider level than the Arizal. His disciple, the Maggid of Mezrich, takes it even wider. Once there were pages of writing of the Torah of the Maggid of Mezrich, kind of floating in the wind. Obviously, it had flown out the window of the house of study, or somebody had dropped it while they were walking. It ended up in an inappropriate place in the gutter, you can probably imagine, in a muddy street. And we're told there was a huge uproar on high in the worlds above, which kind of threatened the Maggid in some way. The Alter Rebbe, who was his disciple, saved the situation by sharing a parable. Now listen to the parable. There was a king. That's how you're supposed to tell king stories, right? There was a king. And the king had a prince, his son. The son got really, really, really ill. He was on the verge of death. Along comes a doctor and says to the king, look, there's no way of saving your child except that, on your crown, there is a gem. It's a centerpiece of the crown right in the front. But that gem has the power of saving your son. So you're going to have to destroy your crown, remove that gem, crush it down to a fine powder, and we'll see. A lot of it will get wasted, but if we can get just a few drops of that into your son's mouth and he swallows it, that'll save his life. Does the king say, my crown, the crown jewels, I will not have them touched? Or does he say, I will do anything, even if if my crown is spoiled, and even if a lot of the powder is wasted, if a little bit saves my child, that's all I'm interested in. It was a powerful parable, because revealing those secrets was dangerous. And we appreciate that now, because those secrets of the Kabbalah have been made public out there in the public domain. They're everywhere. And we see terrible abuse of Kabbalah. I mean, there is a cult that calls itself the Kabbalah Center, I mean it's a kind of criminal Scientology, except that they use books of the Zohar, which they sell for exorbitant amounts, and you go on retreats that you pay your entire life savings and so forth, and it's a scam, but it's all based on Kabbalah. Its adherents buy expensive sets of the book of the Zohar, and they scan the letters of the Zohar, and they sell Kabbalah water for exorbitant amounts, which saves people, etc. It's a scam. It's a cult, but it's based on principles of Kabbalah. Kabbalah is being studied by the most inappropriate disciples around the world. Even in Judaism, there's this new trend now that you study Kabbalah, but that you don't have to follow the basic mitzvot. You don't have to study the basic dimensions of Torah, because that's for the simpletons, but on a much deeper level, but much more sophisticated. So of course, there was a huge danger when Kabbalah was kind of put out there by the Baal Shem Tov, by the Maggid, and now by the Alter Rebbe. There was a huge danger that there would be spillage, and that would end up in the wrong place. But the Alter Rebbe says, if it's going to save the prince, God says, take my Torah and spread it. And this is what happens. And the Alter Rebbe takes it even a step closer and wider, because he begins to disseminate it at levels that have never been disseminated before. And clearly, what his visitors in the cell, spiritual visitors, are telling him is that this arrest is not just about the Mittenagdim. It's not just about the money that was sent, to the Turkish Empire via Palestine and the Jews did. This is something much deeper. This is the very dissemination of the depths of Torah that is being put on trial over here. And the Alter Rebbe says, should I stop? Should I desist? And I say, no. You're obliged to continue even stronger and harder than before. And we find that after the Alter Rebbe was freed from that fortress, the intensity, the depth, the width of the teachings went further. And scholars, students of the Alter Rebbe's Torah can clearly distinguish between what they call the pre-Petersburg and the post-Petersburg eras, when the teachings became far more comprehensible and far more palatable and digestible by the layman out there. So where we are in the year 5782, that doesn't leave too much of the 6th millennium. It's almost Shabbos, and when it's almost Shabbos, preparation for Shabbos becomes more frenetic, as we all know that you have to be ready before sunset with everything. It was 1976, 19th of Kislev, 1976, and the Rebbe made an announcement. He says they are teachers of his predecessors, that was his father-in-law's father, the Rebbe Rashab. He delivered a very, very intense Hasidic discourse, which in fact he delivered over a period of 3 years. It's a series of essays. It ends up being, a whole bunch of books. And the Rebbe says, it's time to take the spreading of Hasidut to the next level. I'd like to print and publish these teachings. The Rebbe's words were, I cannot take it on my own shoulders. It's too much. It's kind of a drastic step further in the dissemination of Hasidut. And therefore, I asked that everybody contribute $1. This was at this huge gathering in 770 where everybody passed up $1, and it was all sent up in envelopes to the Rebbe at his place. He used to sit on a dais at the top, and all the money. And the Rebbe then said, now that you're all partners with me in this endeavor, we're going to publish this book. So the dissemination of Hasidut continues. It continues and continues and continues. It's based on a meeting of the Baal Shem Tov, who had met Mashiach, we are told, and said to him, we've been waiting. It's been a while. So when, sir, will you come? And Mashiach says to the Baal Shem Tov, and this was kind of a turning point in the Baal Shem Tov's life, he says, when your wellsprings start to permeate the outside. Is in fact the famous Chabad melody, so when are you coming? When your wellsprings will spread out, will reach the outside. And that's when Baal Shem Tov began that movement of spreading it wider and wider and wider. We celebrate yesterday and today, 19th and 20th of Kislev, Rosh Hashanah of the Chassidut, because the very spreading of the king's jewel was on trial, not in the Russian interrogation center, but on high, in heaven. There were those forces that stood against it and wanted to stop it, and those forces did not prevail. And so we have Hasidut spreading wider and wider and wider, as I showed you, as recently as 1976. Was another stage of that, which we were aware of because I shared that with us, but there may be other stages, and the stages we're all involved in, including tonight's, which was, in a sense, I tell you the story, spreading of Hasidut. Each of those brings that era of Mashiach, that Shabbos that we await for so long, a little bit closer. As we all know, one is allowed to take in Shabbos before nightfall, before sunset. One is allowed to take in Shabbos, as we do in Sabah here in South Africa. Most communities take in Shabbos, before sunset. So Mashiach, we're ready. Don't delay. Thank you.